recording.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so this is philosophical discussions. Today, my guest is Bruno. We are going to talk about philosophy. So let me start from asking you, Bruno, about your experience in philosophy. What sparked your curiosity in philosophy? How did you start studying it?
I think I grew up in Portugal and in Lisbon, and then I started when I was in high school. I started studying philosophy in high school. We had a philosophy course, so that was my favorite course in high school, and we went through some stuff like Plato and Nietzsche were my favorites, my favorite philosophers that we covered. And I just got interested in philosophy because of that high school class, I think. But I mean, I had always been interested about different ideas and just thinking about the world. I mean, I was always a very curious person, I think, and I enjoyed talking about it, talking about these different questions in school. That was the pretty much the first class I ever enjoyed. I studied philosophy at university as well. So that was fun. That was in England at the University of Leeds, and sort of like my minor in a way. And it was or even my major. I mean, depending on how you look at it. I studied philosophy and political science, and it was fun. And I still like to talk about philosophy today.
So what's what motivates you to, for example, this club, philosophical club? Like what motivates you to run this club, talk about this, to do that? What's the essential motivation? With just conversations about philosophy, asking some deep questions, or
Yeah, I started a philosophy club in Minneapolis where I live, and I like having good conversations with people, and I'm interested in exploring these ideas and creating new ideas as well. It's a little bit like in literature you tell stories, you create stories, and in philosophy you create ideas, and you explore ideas, right? So I'm interested in literature, but I'm also interested in philosophy, perhaps more so.
Can you tell me what kind of ideas, like the most exciting and interesting?
Well, I'm particularly interested in political philosophy. I've always been interested in politics, the way about the way how about the way society is organized, and about power, about changing the world. So political philosophy to me has always been very interesting. But I'm interested in ideas in general. I like I guess all the ideas that are concern the world, and I'm interested in many different things. I'm not a very scientific guy, so science to me is a little bit boring sometimes. But other stuff is usually pretty interesting to me.
But how do you draw the distinction between philosophy and science?
I don't think there's a very hard distinction. I think because what is science today used to be considered philosophy. It's not natural philosophy, right? So I don't think there's a big distinction. It's just that when it involves a lot of math and very
maybe some abstract questions, right?
Well, and very technical, then it gets a little bit. I'm interested in it, but I'm not quite as interested. I've always been more interested in the human aspect of philosophy, and just the general questions to me has always been a little bit more interesting.
Do you think that philosophy actually can bring some change in our social life. So you mentioned that you're interested in political science and
Yeah, not all
philosophy.
philosophy, not all philosophy, but some things. Usually it's the stuff that is more political that can affect society the most. I mean, traditionally it has been that way. So I mean, the way we see language, for example, philosophy of language, that's not really going to change the world all that much.
Mm-hmm.
But it will. I mean, yeah. I mean,
No, it might change.
philosophy is not about changing the world, right? It's about, in general, it's about understanding the world. But some kinds of philosophy do change the world, more like the political stuff.
So is it kind of new theory how we should live or how we may live to create some better relationship between humans, between people, or it's like what exactly, like you say that for example philosophy of language, well, it's actually like I think it may change the way how we think, and this may lead to
Yeah, maybe.
to improvements in all like different branches of human relationships. But in philosophy, yeah, let's talk about some influential ideas in philosophy for the last probably maybe few centuries or even more. Like, what
Well,
do you
I mean,
think about?
the obvious example is Marx, right? I mean, Marxism has influenced I mean, has shaped history to a considerable degree. You know, I mean, you're in Russia, so I mean, Russia was
Yeah,
really heavily influenced by. I mean, Marx was not a politician, right? I mean, he was a philosopher,
yeah,
and
like
eventually those ideas made their way into some circles that were more interested in actually changing things rather than talking about things. So that's usually the way it goes, you know, like because if you look at the American Revolution, for example, that was also very influenced by, I don't think it would have happened. The French Revolution the same way. And they were different people for the most part, right? The first the philosophers talked about those ideas, and then they were implemented in some ways.
do you think it's actually like philosophers who first come up with some ideas and then there are changes on a social level, or it's vice versa? So first there are some changes and then philosophers actually justify these changes by creating some
No,
theories.
I think when you look at least the history of the last 5 centuries or so, it's more, you have these revolutions and ideas in the minds of people, and then that will eventually change society. I think
so it's top
is,
down. It's like top down. First, there's an idea in your mind, and then you develop this idea through various writings and public speaking, whatever. And then it's actually bring changes. Because
at least the most influential ones, yes, because those are the ones that create change, right? Those ones create change. You can have ideas that are influenced by society, but those are usually ideas that won't change society because they're just trying to explain what's already in place, right? So
yeah, but in Marxism, for example, there was just the change of means of production, right? So before Marx, there was a different social structure, and then it started like these inventions in the 17th century and 18th century. Like there was a shift on a social level, and Marx basically he came up with the theory which describes what's actually going on in this on various levels, like theory of social classes, and it's like, it's not like, okay, there's social classes, you came up with this idea and then you impose this idea on society. It's more, okay, this is the dynamic of our interactions, social interactions, and then you try to make sense out of it, and you make a theory and say, oh, this is how it works. There's some people who basically work and people who don't work, right? And those who work, they stay, they can't actually can become free, since those people who don't work, they exploit those who work. It's like, I'm trying to, it's kind of a rough explanation, but generally It's very hard to come up with something like that when you are outside of social sphere. But when you sit in cave, for example, and think, okay, how the world works, right? So you play with your imagination, and then finally, oh, this is probably the case, and then you go and tell people what's going on. So in Marx, it's more about, okay, what's going on really? How to make sense out of these interactions.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the case of Marx, for sure, it was a reaction to how the world had changed. Yeah, but then because of the way he interpreted those changes and what was going on, I mean, that that created a philosophy and an ideology that in turn, created other types.
It's like it's a different field. In Marx, he started as a philosopher, and I remember, as far as I remember, he studied Hegel. Hegel was his professor, but then he shifted to political economy, and there were other guys like Adam Smith and Ricardo, and he criticized them, and
yeah. Well, Adam Smith is another example. I mean, he changed the world. In his case, it wasn't so much about hard politics, but it was about economics, which is related to politics. But I would say it's different from politics, especially in his case, because he was really just trying to come up with how to understand the world, and that's what economics is at the end of the political economy. I guess it's about implementing certain things, but economics in general it tries to be the science of wealth, of means of production and distribution of wealth and all that. So he created, but by sometimes, like Adam Smith or Freud even, sometimes you create, of course, the more time goes by, I mean, the harder it will be to create anything truly new and so influential, right? Because those are the beginnings of something. But they created new fields of thought, and those new fields of thought obviously shaped the world. Freud shaped the world to quite a big extent, but I mean, perhaps not quite as much as Adam Smith. So yeah, sometimes when you present all these like new ideas and they catch fire, right? They spread, and they actually create, in these two cases, like a field of studies almost. Not almost. They created a new field of study. I mean, that's very influential. Yeah.
Do you think it's going to be like forever the case? Like there will be new ideas in next century or the following centuries, or we finally
no,
describe everything and say, oh, this is the world, and
I think there aren't that many possibilities of creating new fields of study like that anymore. I mean, maybe, yeah, we'll see a couple new ones being created in the next couple centuries, but in general, I think we've done what we had to do.
But I actually I remember,
but there will be changes. There will be changes in the same fields of study. I mean, I'm sure economics, for example, it's a fairly new science. I mean, it's we're talking about not a long time. So in 1,000 years from now, if we're still around, I'm sure economics will have changed dramatically. In fact, it's not even 1,000 years, 100 years from now, because and that's a whole new other discussion, because it's a long discussion and difficult, but with the extreme income inequality that we have right now, and with especially like with the evolution of technology, and how that's going to impact economics, I think we're going to have certainly new economic models, new economic ideas in the next 100 years. I think a lot of economics will change a lot, the science of economics. But there's only one, it's like, in the United States, for example, you have lots of presidents, right? But no matter how many influential presidents you have, there's only one first president. Yeah. So, so it's kind of like the same thing, in economics, there's only one. I don't even know if Adam Smith is considered the first one, but but he's certainly the most famous. And yeah, you can only have that many. It's like even in philosophy, you know, Plato and Aristotle, Socrates, those guys. I mean, those are always going to be seen as those, you know,
Models, some kind of
the,
models.
the original, you know, the original philosopher. It doesn't matter how many other philosophers there are.
You know, I'm interested. You say like in 100 years, economic will like change our social, like the way how we live. But don't you think that if we solve all these problems, like let's say everybody will have whatever they need to live, and there wouldn't be like income inequality, and everybody is going to be happy. Like, is it actually like? I mean, if there's an ideal state, let's say, and we live in this state, is this kind of life on a philosophical scale better than the life when we actually need to do something, when we need to solve certain problems and work on them? And
yeah, well, I think
isn't it threatening, like, to have this ideal state when you actually don't need to do anything? You just wake up and everything is given to you. Everything is.
I think perhaps, but I don't think we're really gonna have that ideal state anytime soon. You know, I think we're gonna have. I think the 21st century. We'll see, but I think there will be lots of problems to solve. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're gonna have some pretty huge problems. I think. Look at, you know, right now Afghanistan. That shows you that there's in a big part of the world there's big. I don't know if problems is the word, but I guess that's the way we're phrasing it. So, you know, there are big problems. There are many things to sort out in the Middle East, but I think in most of the world, the most advanced economies, richest countries, stable democracies are, for the most part, where there are fewer difficulties to overcome for people. But even then, I mean, you know, you look at a lot of Western democracies, and you know, there's a lot of messy things going on still. So I don't think that's going to change. I think it might get worse. You know, honestly, I think this might be actually a good time. I think it might get worse. I think if you look at the world right now, I mean, there are lots of, you know, I might be wrong, of course, but if I personally, if I had to bet, I would say, and I think most of people would agree with me that there are lots of reasons why things seem to be going in the wrong direction, or there will be more problems than there are now. I mean, we have the environment, we have the nuclear weapons, you know, we have, like I said, growing economic inequality. We have like religious fundamentalism. At least some of those things. We have the technology aspect, like that. There are many differences, like the evolution of technology is impacting politics, the economics. I think there are so many changes, even if they're not for the worst. Some of these things are very threatening, but for example, technology, I mean, it's not necessarily bad, right? Some things are good, but it's disrupting, you know, it's disruptive. It disrupts things, and it changes things. So we'll see. There's no way we won't see a lot of changes. You know, we're going to see huge change, even if it's just technologically. And that's going to change how everything works.
You know, you mentioned democracies, and I'd like to touch on this Aristotelian division of like all politics. Basically, there's three forms, like democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. Yeah. And kind of their deviations, like it wasn't democracy, it was politia. Like politia and democracy was a deviation from politia. And in politia, basically, the idea is that citizens like it's not a well, what was the idea? So the point is again, polity is kind of the good democracy, and democracy basically was a type of bad democracy when
like the corrupt
kind of
democracy.
corruption, and then aristocracy, it's when the power is in hands of few, but again oligarchy is corruption, a corrupted aristocracy. And then monarchy is again, there's a ruler who is a father for his or her citizens, and tyranny is a corruption of
is it the corruption of democracy might be anarchy, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it may be like it probably may be like if we use contemporary concepts, it may be democracy and anarchy. But
but even back then, like what you're saying, I think it might be, because I've read that as well, but it might be anarchy. But yeah, I mean, I also don't remember 100%. So
yeah, but my question is kind of, now it seems that democracy is an ideal, let's say, political organization, but like, is it going to be an ideal political organization for us? So there are some theories which say, like, every time when you come up with a special political organization, it goes for a certain time, but then people are bored and they just want to change. No matter even if it works or doesn't work, doesn't matter. They just change this organization to try a new one. Since everybody is bored, nobody wants to live under democracy or under aristocracy or under monarchy.
Yeah. But I think, well, there are kind of like there are 2 or 3 different questions there, in a sense. Like, one of those questions, actually, you're asking me a lot of like 2 or 3 different questions, I think, in a sense, because one of the questions is, can democracy continue, right, and not be corrupted? And that is like, for example, we just saw in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a democracy, they had installed a democracy, and it fell because, not that it was very stable in the first place, but there was something that could be considered democracy, and that fell right away because it wasn't sustainable by itself. So that's one example of a democracy falling. And then you can make the case for other places.
Yeah, but we still have a global idealization of democracy right now on a global level.
And I guess globally, I think it would be hard for it to fall unless
an artificial intelligence just take over and say, now you little humans, no way for you.
If we're going like sci-fi, I mean, it's certainly, that would happen. But I mean, if the United States, for example, if the democracy in the United States fell, I think that there wouldn't be much hope for the rest of the world, because it's so influential for democracies. But even, we've seen this happen before, in Europe, in Western Europe, like when Germany fell to the Nazis, and Italy fell to the fascists, Spain fell to the fascists, Portugal fell to the fascists. So most of Western Europe went from being actually democracy, because they were democracies, and they became far right governments. And there weren't that many, if you look at World War II, there weren't that many democracies left, at least not influential democracies. You had basically the United States and France and the UK, and those are the big ones really left. And then you have maybe the Netherlands and Belgium, but I mean, the big ones were the States and France and the UK. So that was one example of I mean, democracy, it seemed like it was going everywhere, and then it contracted, right, pretty aggressively. And then World War II changed things again, but it's not impossible that we see something like that happen again. In fact, like the far right seems to be on the rise. It has been on the rise now for quite some time. So you never know.
So, I was thinking also, like, not now, but previously, I clearly remember maybe 5-6 years ago, before I started studying English, for me, like, all politics was kind of like, I dismissed basically everything related to politics. So for me, philosophy was more kind of this pursuit of self-knowledge, and an ancient phrase for it, it's gnosis out. So basically learn yourself, understand who you are. It's more even like psychology, modern psychology, when you give up on the outer world and you basically dive in yourself and try to understand, like, your how you think, what are your motivation, what's like what you're doing, and so you ask like deeper questions, like what the meaning of life, who am I, like, am I like this body, or maybe like I'm endless consciousness. And later I started also, like, especially after I started studying English, all these questions, especially in politics, they started affecting me. And at first I didn't like it. So at first it was, I'm just spending time. I'm not doing really my serious self-inquiry. So instead of doing that, I'm just listening to other people, some geopolitics and, different affairs. But gradually you see that it's almost impossible to, like, I try to get in kind of personal cave and sit there and be, sit there forever. But then the outer world, it still affects you, and you can't ignore it. And since I started doing something, considering the outer world, I've realized that this Schopenhauerian way of doing philosophy, when you kind of go in asceticism and you sit alone and just read the greatest thinkers and you write books and you don't care about anything. It's actually it doesn't that doesn't work as well as it probably worked before, since now we're so strongly interconnected. Like the internet seems changed everything to, like, you may basically communicate with the entire world if you know the language and if you understand what's going on. But it's like I want to ask the question about these two distinctions in philosophy. Like, one is self-studying and another is kind of directed on the outer world. So as for you, is it actually is it possible to do both simultaneously, or you may just go from one to another, or you I don't know, what do you think about it? What's your ideas? Since if you focus on politics, right, you can't actually ask deeper, like you can't really focus on yourself, you can concentrate on what's going on inside. And if
I think you can do both. I think you can do both. I think politics is but I would agree, at least from my perspective, I would say those are the two. If I were really to, and I don't even like doing that all that much, but if I had to divide like philosophy into fields, I would say those are kind of, to me, those are the two biggest differences, different philosophies, right? It's in a sense, because one thing is to think about just knowledge and about simply intellectual questions, and one thing is to in a different form of doing philosophy is to kind of like think about practical aspects of the world, and politics is the biggest one, but it's, you also have like economic questions, questions about technology, how technology evolves, how it affects people, so it's not even just politics, but all kinds of like applied philosophy sort of thing. I don't think one of the two is better than the other. I think they're just different ways of going about thinking about the world. And if you want to be a purist, you can even dismiss all the applied philosophy, and you can just focus on it depends on what you want to do at the end of the day, like the good thing about philosophy, and also the problem of philosophy, is that it's a little bit uncertain, like what philosophy actually is. It kind of like changes a little bit depending on who you're talking to.
We kind of define for ourselves, like every philosopher basically redefines the entire field of philosophy. But I'd like to think about it in terms of communication and thinking. So for me, politics and things related to politics, it's more about communication. Whereas this second side, it's more about thinking. So you basically learn philosophy through thinking. You don't need anybody to communicate with. You basically communicate with books, read some original works, and like when you need a question, when you need an answer, you basically go and read book, and then if you found an answer, you ask another question. If you didn't found, you read another book. But communication with people, again, it feels as if it's never satisfiable. Whereas in a book, it or not just in a book, it may be some course of lectures or anything you find on the internet. But the idea again is like thinking and communication. So if you may think, at least for me, it was my personal experience. So I could sit basically alone for 5 years, like reading books, thinking, and then I got in this outer world, and it seems that people are kind of talking about some superficial things, and it's very hard to focus their attention on something, to force them to read some deep, like, philosophical works and books, and they come on, like it's outdated. What are you talking about? I'm not talking about Plato. It's you ask somebody to read recent philosophers like Nietzsche or Kant or Schopenhauer, or some. Now I'm reading this John Searle, and I really enjoy reading John Searle. I discovered like so many amazing stuff in the last 3 months during the summer. I've watched 2 courses of lectures, first on philosophy of language, second on philosophy of mind. And I've read 2 books, The Theory of Speech Acts and the meaning and expression. And now I'm going to read the book about intentionality and all these. Like, basically, it opened for me a new field of philosophy, since I was mostly influenced by Germans, and
this is more analytical, right? Analytical philosophy.
English Anglo-American philosophy. It's John Searle. It's more about analytical philosophy, and there's an objective world. Whereas in Germans, they got rid of objective world a long time ago, and I was basically like thinking about through their glasses.
Yeah.
This distinction between.
I mean, I like. I would be interested in learning more about analytical philosophy. I think Bertrand Russell is analytical. I like Bertrand Russell a lot, but he's the only modern philosopher that I really tend to follow.
Have you read his history of philosophy? Bertrand Russell's history of philosophy. Because like
the only full book that I read was the Problems of Philosophy, I think, which is kind of like the smallest one. but yeah, his history of philosophy I think is very good, and yeah, just anything by him tends to be good.
Well, it's on my reading list, like one of the books which I want to read as fast as possible.
And I enjoyed, because you shared some of the John Searle things with me, and I enjoy that quite a bit.
Recently I shifted to, like, I was reading this book Meaning and Expression by John Searle, and one of the latest chapters is about metaphors, and I started thinking deeply about metaphors, and I discovered another guy, George Lakoff. He was a very influential linguist, and he is still, like, I watched his lectures. I found a course of lectures on linguistics, then lectures by John Lakoff, and I watched them in 3 days, basically. 4 lectures a day. It was so amazing. It allowed me to understand on a kind of theoretical level what I was doing intuitively for the last 10 years, especially like when I was studying Russian and writing poetry and some fairy tales. And basically when I was writing in Russian, what I was doing is I took real events and I mapped them in different frames and created, like, you take, for example, in my case, there was my dissertation. I was writing about the state of law, and the basic idea there was that to understand what is the state, I project it to the on the personal level, and I think, okay, let's suppose I am the state. Like, what is the government? It's my mind. Like, let's say my mind. Yeah. What is the law? Oh, it's probably language and some principles which I have. And then I try to imagine that, okay, let's suppose that states are different individuals. Like Russia, it's person A. USA, it's person B. England is person C. And what happened in this? Yeah, and I was analyzing the First World War, and I tried to like kind of as if it were like a group of people, and I tried to imagine that they all had different motivations and what kind of motivations, what they were doing. Like, for example, Germany was training itself like the 10 hours every day and doing nothing else, just training. And so some other countries was involved in intellectual pursuits, but essentially it all led to the war. And again, the point is like you project, or they call it mapping. So you map ideas from one frame to another, and then you build, like you come to understanding these ideas much better, since you kind of create some some picture, some story. It may not be true, but it definitely helps you to understand. And in Lakov, there's such like these lectures. I probably will watch them once more a few times in following months to understand better what's going on there.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. What was we talking about? Political. Yeah. Political philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, like, the question about evolution, right? Do philosopher evolve? Like, do you think that, for example, let's take Socrates, right? It's a kind of ideal model of philosophy. And if you compare some modern philosophers, like so we may say that our tools evolved, our science evolved in different ways. Like people generally, like dancers start, like there are many types of dancing, but like I'm trying to find a good metaphor to to explain what I mean. So the idea, again, there's a Socrates, but can we say that now we have philosophers who are kind of more philosophers than Socrates was a philosopher? And is it possible to create a kind of a different type of philosopher, or next type of philosopher, whatever, in terms of considering it from a social like we have society, and there are philosophers in society, and Socrates, like well, we know what happened with Socrates in his society, right?
Yeah.
And like what role he played in his society. So he was a kind of teacher, and he taught he taught youth, and Plato, Aristotle, whatever. And now, like, what's the difference between these between what's going on now and between what was going on before? Like, do philosophers have more influence on society than they had like 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago? And will they have more influence in society in the future? Like, in your opinion, like, what do you think about that?
No, I don't think they have. It depends. It depends on the time. I think Socrates, the part of the reason why Socrates is so revered, and Plato and Aristotle, is because they were so influential, right? It's we still talk about them, and they are really the original philosophers. That we still refer back to them. And then, I mean, if you look at the Middle Ages, there isn't really much philosophy from the Middle Ages that we still talk about, because it wasn't a very the environment wasn't very conducive. Partially, the environment wasn't very conducive to philosophy, and even the Roman Empire before that didn't really produce a lot of, at least that we have access to, like fantastic philosophers that we still talk about today. So I think it kind of depends on the era. I think that I used to think that used to bother me, like the fact, and a lot of people have this idea, that philosophy is kind of like a silly thing to pursue because it's already done, like you people have been talking about things for 2,000 years or so, and 2,500 years, and there's nothing else to talk about. But I mean, that's kind of a stupid notion, because if you really think about it, because like what you're saying before, I think the value of philosophy now is that for us to talk about the issues that we have right now in the 21st century, or previous issues, but from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very different from whatever it is. And Plato is, I would say, my favorite philosopher, but that's Plato, that's 2,500 years ago, or I don't know, 2,200 years ago,
mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long time ago. So he's not going to have what he said. He's done his job, right? I mean, he's good, but and it was a fantastic job. We can learn a lot from it, but it's never going to be what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to have the same perspectives. We're not going to have the same opinions on anything, unless it's something like very not metaphorical, but something like very say abstract, right? Perhaps, if we're talking about love, then maybe our conversation is going to be similar to the conversation that Plato had in his time.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of things, it's not, so we have certainly a different worldview, and obviously science changed a lot. Science changed a lot since Hobbes' time. It changed a lot since Locke's time. It changed a lot since Nietzsche's time.
There are some problems with connection. Okay, I guess we have to wait for a few seconds. Oh, yeah. Now I presume.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm sorry, but I had a connection problem. But yeah, so basically, we have very different views from philosophers in the past. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so philosophy will never really be done. I mean, it's an impossibility.
Do you think now philosophers are more influential and like more like I found actually a good analogy? Like imagine 200, like how many 200 2,400 years ago, like warriors were fighting with swords, right, and with shields. But now we have warriors with all sorts of weapons, which are much more powerful. And like an evolution of a warrior is like self-evident. But in the philosopher, did the philosopher evolved in his way of using probably language, or maybe like writing, or whatever philosophers use for for doing their job?
Well, in a way, because we have a different type of technology now. So having access to mass communication now, YouTube in particular, but the internet, I think the internet was a big thing that changed. I think we haven't even seen those changes completely,
Mm-hmm.
But I think
I also think we'll just start. I mean,
it just started. But
in 20 years there will be something. I can't even imagine what's going to happen in 20 years.
Well, I think the technology changes the exposure of ideas, sometimes, and changes it quite dramatically. Like a big reason, if you look at the there is a connection, I think, between the invention of the printing press, and that was around 1500, to all these philosophers that we study today, that we talk about today, starting to show up, and I think it's because books just became available to people and they weren't before. And that was a huge technological difference between pre 1500 and post 1500, is that all of a sudden society became literate, not everybody at first, but that was a big change. And the fact that you could print books and that people could actually buy them and read them.
Yeah, not just books, but newspapers, right?
And newspapers. So it that changed things, because philosophy, instead of just being spoken, it could also be written. And that philosophy, for the most part, like what people study today, I mean, it's written philosophy rather than, it's stuff that people put into books and stuff.
Now we're shifting to philosophical podcasts, right? So you don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that the internet now, it's a huge change, because now really people don't read books anymore. I mean, most people. But people actually started listening to people that are not in the room with them, like someone who's in a completely different part of the world and at a different time, like 2 months from now, can listen to this podcast. And this is just us having a conversation. We're not even in the same place, actually, or the same country, but we're having a conversation, just like if we were having a conversation at a coffee shop, right?
Essentially, you may connect to everybody, right? That's the biggest breakthrough. Like before.
Well, before we could only have one conversation at one time in one coffee shop, and you and I would have to be in the same city, in the same coffee shop at the same time for us to have this conversation. Now we're having this conversation, and not only you can be in Russia and I can be in the United States right now, but also someone from who's in Australia now,
Afghanistan, my watch.
From Australia or Afghanistan, they can have the conversation with them. They can't speak, but they can listen. So it's like they could be our buddies in the coffee shop that are just listening to us, so this really has changed what the meaning of a philosophical conversation is. It's not just an exchange between two people. This can be perhaps not this one, but especially if you look at something like like the Joe Rogan podcast or something like that. At this point, he's having a conversation with someone. That's a conversation that is being had essentially between 5 million people. There's all these people listening in. So a conversation, and that applies to philosophical conversations. Like now, philosophers, if they want to have a conversation, they can have a conversation, but it doesn't need to be restricted to two people at one time. It can be a lot of people that can listen to that conversation, and in a lot of different time periods and in a lot of different places. So it has really changed things dramatically. So that technology, I think, that technological change, I think, is a big revolution. And I think the philosophers that are influential in the 21st century, I think a lot of them will be influential because of the internet.
Yeah, in my view, I perceive it as, I watch lots of philosophical content on the internet. Most of what I watch, it's just lectures about philosophy or some podcasts. And I see that there are so many people who have this thirst for knowledge, for some deep thoughts, ideas. And I think like in few 3-4 generations, we'll have just millions of philosophers. Like in case of Socrates, they're just Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and maybe 100 other like famous, strong philosophers who can really think. And now we'll have like millions of people like that. Since like you may connect, as you say, there are 5 million people who listen to Joe Rogan, let's say, or somebody else. But imagine that we get philosophers, like really strong philosophers, who may, like you just watch them and you basically after 10, 20, 30 years, don't sleep, 10, 20, 30 hours, you'll understand most of what people couldn't understand for, going to the university and studying philosophy for years. So you may kind of participate in this philosophical project just by sitting at home. And again, it shouldn't be just sitting and listening. You also may connect with people who also are interested in philosophy and develop yourself as a philosopher through communication. Through you don't need to write.
And even people that go to university and study philosophy, that's a very small amount of people, all things considered, there aren't that many people that actually go to university and take philosophy courses. I mean, that's a very small number of people compared to the number of people that will be interested in philosophy with the internet.
Yeah, and it brings us to the next question about this difference between non-academic philosophy and academic philosophy.
Yeah. Well, it's a big, I think, I mean, that's another way to differentiate, right? The two big fields of philosophy. In a sense, it's academic and non-academic. I just think it's different. Academic is essentially professional, in a sense, professional philosophy, and it's very related to education, I guess, in a sense. It works differently from non-academic, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, but you may also be a non-academic philosopher. Like, for example, I consider myself a kind of non-academic philosopher, since most of what I'm doing is studying philosophy, studying science, and developing myself in this field. And I don't feel like I didn't have formal education, but for me, I've watched probably much more lectures on philosophy than any student who actually studies at university. And
certainly, yeah.
And whatever when I have conversations with somebody and I can't understand something about philosophy, I may just go and dedicate maybe a week or couple of weeks to studying this subject, and I actually can know it very fast.
Well, the academic philosophy is its own thing. It's the system that they've developed. It's the university system and how it works. It has good things about it. It has bad things about it. It's very specific, right? There's a specific way of doing things.
Yeah, I think,
and like I said, it's related to education. A lot of what academic philosophers do, in a sense, is to teach students about what other philosophers said in the past. That's kind of that's a big part of academic philosophy, because that's what universities are about.
Yeah, but on YouTube they are doing the same, and even in better, sometimes even much better quality than on. I don't know. Of course, I haven't studied at universities, but it seems that the quality which is presented on YouTube, it's so great and so mind-boggling. But I think this nice analogy between an academic philosophy and non-academic philosophy. We may compare it to religion and mysticism, right? So there were figures in religion who kind of represent popes and those clerics and mystics who basically did the same, but they didn't participate in this organized religion. So in the same, I think it's very
I think it's kind of a good analogy. Academic philosophy is like organized philosophy, like organized religion. It's and I think, honestly, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's particularly useful at the end of the day. I'm not really sure. I think non-academic philosophy is to me it's a more useful thing for the world. It's more influential. I mean, it's a better way to go about philosophy in general, if I'm that's my opinion, at least. I mean, I studied philosophy and I even applied to do a PhD in philosophy. I didn't get in, but and I never tried again. But in a sense, that maybe that was good. I don't know. I'm not so sure. yeah, I think academic philosophy is I think, yeah, I think being unrestricted, you know, not having all the limitations that academic philosophers have, I think that probably creates a more interesting type of philosophy, you know, because academic philosophers, you know, there are a lot of limitations to what you can do as an academic.
Mm-hmm. So
You
you
know,
can you can't say certain words, right? So certain
well,
kind of
everything
stuff.
needs to be done in a certain way, you know. There's a system to it, and
Mm-hmm.
that is good in some disciplines and bad in others. I think in philosophy it's not a very good thing.
Mm-hmm. So limit your freedom in
That's,
creative.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly there are advantages and disadvantages. Like I said, certainly one of the disadvantages is that they have less freedom, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's, yeah, I mean, it would be silly really to think that an academic philosopher has unrestricted freedom.
Yeah, I think they also kind of fight with each other, especially in these fields which I studied, like German philosophy, basically. Schopenhauer is an example of non-academic philosopher, and Hegel, like academic philosopher. And there's at least maybe Hegel didn't fight with Schopenhauer, but Schopenhauer fought with Hegel like on a very serious level. And you may see this like not in only in German philosophy, but in many other philosophers as well. So some people who just, you know, kind of, it's philosophy evolves because there's two different let's say groups of people who claim that
Let me give you an example. For example, right, and this kind of like drove me crazy. Not in like, I understand why they do it. I mean, it's understandable. Philosophy is a different, it's kind of like a tricky, it's one of the most tricky subjects really there is. So but you know, like when I was a student, and this is like that in every university, um you have to everything needs to be in a certain field, essentially, you know, of philosophy, subfield, you know. And then you need to define what is philosophy, what is not philosophy. And then out of the things that are philosophy, you need to define which subfield of philosophy does it belong to, you know. And then
metaphysics, epistemology, right?
yeah, and then
Ethics.
there are only a number of subfields of philosophy that even count, you know. So everything else you can't really talk about it, you know, because it's not that subfield anymore, you know. So it's that's what I mean. Like there are lots of things that you can't do, you know. It's okay if you're working within those confines. Yeah, yeah, but I think that's not, yeah, I mean there are certain limitations to it, you know. I think it's not particularly the most useful of fields for academics.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally, yeah, I prefer the more the notion of um, philosophy as a pursuit for life, you know, for people in general, for society. I think and this is when this was not possible before, but it is possible now, because there's a lot more ways for people to organize, to get together and be organized in a way that they can, if they share the same interests, they can talk to other people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Before you could do it, but it was more limited, you know, like nobles. And for example, in Britain or France, you know, they had the means and the I guess social circle that, and in fact that was, you know, like when you talk about like the influential philosophers, a lot of them were actually not academics, you know. They were aristocrats that were interested in these ideas and developed these ideas. I mean, if you look at, you know, people like Montesquieu or
Mm-hmm.
Rousseau, you know. So yeah, I mean, I would have to go look at their bios to see which ones were professors or not, but a lot of them certainly were not, you know. And but before, it was a small number of people that could actually get interested in philosophy, have the means to pursue it, have other people of similar quality, of similar intellectual quality that they could talk to, you know. It was a very small amount of people. that had these possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
As time progressed, you know, a little bit, you had a little bit more of a pool of people, you know, and then places like coffee shops, for example, in France and some other countries like Germany, you know, Austria, people could actually go to those coffee shops, and they would find other people that they could talk to, you know, and have good conversations.
Yeah, saloons in French, right? Like
Yeah.
some famous women, you know.
And now, I mean, with stuff like, you know, the means that we have to create groups and develop these groups and go on the internet. I mean, now there are more possibilities even.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's like it provides you with possibilities for connection. But actually, like let's let's talk about this. Let's suppose there's an ideal philosopher of modern time, and does he achieve his climax by communicating with people, or it's more about like really studying in depth all these philosophical questions which were posed by previous philosophers and projecting them on contemporary realities? I mean, you see,
yeah, I think the ideal philosopher, that's an interesting question. Maybe to me, the ideal philosopher would be the philosopher that, number one, goes and studies
mm-hmm.
these questions, thinks about the questions, and reads what other people have said about these things, you know, goes and reads the works of philosophers, thinks about it, you know, and all that. Then he talks about it with people as well,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then he also produces content of some sort, you know, like writes books or essays or stuff like that, you know.
Podcasts.
Yeah, does podcasts,
yeah,
you know.
now it's
produces content, but I think those are essentially the three things that I think are interesting for a modern philosopher to do, unless you're an academic, and then it's a completely different, you know, they do what they do, you know, to be successful as an academic. But I'm talking about non-academic philosopher, you know, studies and thinks,
mm-hmm.
Talks with people, and is part of communities, and also produces content for if other people want to learn from, or to, you know, to see what they have to say, you know, books, essays, podcasts, and
so basically he spreads
the word, yeah, in a sense, because he, you know, that's kind of like why is Plato so influential, right? It's not because he was active back then, it's because he's active right now, you know.
Yeah, sure, but
right?
he's more alive than
exactly. He's still alive because we have his books, right? So I don't think that's essential, right? I'm not saying that's essential. You don't need to do that. I'm saying like the perfect philosopher, the ideal philosopher in my mind,
mm-hmm.
would be someone that also does that, like just like Plato did back then.
Mm-hmm.
It actually hasn't really changed that much since Greece. It's just now we have different means, different circumstances. Like Plato couldn't do podcasts, but now we can, you know. But it's essentially the same thing, you know. Study, be curious about things, think about things, then be part of a community, which they had, you know. Plato even started a school and everything, you know, like have communities where you talk to people. That's really the heart of philosophy. For me personally, I think that's the heart of philosophy, to talk about other people, to talk about these things with other people, and to see if your ideas really are any you know, if they make sense or not. And you only really know that in a sense when you talk to people. And then then spread the word, you know, if you can, you know, write stuff, talk, you know. Now we can do podcasts. Plato couldn't. But he actually, out of all the philosophers, though, I don't, perhaps he wasn't the only one that wrote dialogues, but not that many philosophers wrote dialogues. Dialogues are sort of like a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
From back then, you know, because it's not a normal book, you know, it's basically a conversation. He was trying to do a podcast, you know, it's just a sort of like a scripted podcast.
Yeah. Can you imagine something like that? Like to write the script and then make a podcast.
Yeah, that's essentially what he did without shooting it, obviously, because they didn't have cameras.
Yeah, but do you think they were real dialogues or Plato just made them up? And if they were
No,
real,
I think he made them up. Yeah, but it was
but he
probably
still
based on.
made them up on something, right? It wasn't just
Yeah, I don't think you made them up. You can make them
imagination.
up out of nothing. I think he had those conversations, right? And then he portrayed them the best way he could.
In the same way, for example, I may sit now after this dialogue and summarize it, and probably add something to it and make a kind of dialogue out of what we really like discuss.
Yeah.
And then,
obviously, when you write a dialogue, you can make it better, right?
Because yeah, sure.
You have the time to think about it. Everything is it's like like the difference between improvising a movie and having a script beforehand.
Yeah, that's the point. So when we have a conversation, basically, probably 50, maybe 70% of what we are saying is irrelevant. But when you like write a dialogue, you take an essence of what has been said. You ask some questions like what was the meaning, how far we got, and then you just make it clear and short and understandable.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like to ask you like a few more questions. First is about wisdom. Like, what do you think on wisdom in general? Like, what is wisdom and how it relates to knowledge in modern times?
I don't know. It's difficult because it's just semantics, I guess, but I think it could be the same as knowledge if you wanted to mean that, or it could be something different. It could be just being wise, is have a good understanding about things and making the right decisions. So it's a little bit different from knowledge itself.
What the means to like by which we achieve wisdom? Like, is it a communication? Is it thinking? Is it learning? Is it doing particular activities? Contemplation, meditation, whatever.
I think wisdom is a trickier one than knowledge. I think knowledge you acquired, it's fairly straightforward. Like you read, you discuss, you practice, and if you create knowledge, I guess you have to come up with something more or less original, or at least summarize what has been said before. But wisdom, I mean, it's a little bit more general. How to become a wise man, I mean, that's a difficult one, right? I mean, you might read all the books in the planet and not become wise, so that one is a little bit more open to interpretation, because it kind of depends on your judgment. Knowledge doesn't really truly depend on judgment all that much.
Certainly can't read all books, but like I was thinking that probably wisdom is about like reading the books which you actually need to read, like developing this mechanism of choosing.
And you have to be a person that is wise. Sometimes, maybe there are some people that just can't be wise. It's a minority. It's a minority of people. I think most people can achieve some degree of wisdom. But yeah, I mean, it depends on what you mean by wisdom at the end of the day. But I associate wisdom, I think it's knowledge, but it could also be an understanding, developing some sort of understanding, of things that is elevated. That's not knowledge. I think I see knowledge as something a little bit more. It's a little bit harder to define wisdom, and harder to achieve as well, because it's almost like like Siddhartha, he's trying to look for wisdom, not necessarily knowledge. He's trying to understand the world, the universe. And that can be very difficult. Not everybody can become a Buddha.
Let's just try to look at it from, can you make some examples of modern wise people, like who are alive now?
Well, if you listen to Bertrand Russell, like I'm not saying that I agree with all of his philosophy or anything, or I don't even understand all of his philosophy, because he does a lot of like technical stuff. He was a mathematician, so he was just as as a math, like he focused as much as in mathematics as he did in philosophy, and his philosophy a lot of the times is a little bit mathematical. But no, but I mean, if you listen to him, I mean, there's just some people that are wise in the way they speak and the way they see the world, you know, and doesn't mean they're 100% wise, but you can understand that you should probably listen to them. Like Winston Churchill as well, you know, that's a completely different case, but that's more in the sense of geopolitics, you know, like he understood what was going on most of the time, you know, even if you don't agree with him. Some people are just kind of like fools, you know, like most of the politicians of his time, you know, before him, they were kind of fools, and he was telling people, you know, they're fools. Should probably listen to me, and he was vindicated, you know. So it can also, wisdom can be different things in different contexts, you know.
Yeah, you shouldn't necessarily be scholarly and know lots of stuff, but you can apply your knowledge at the particular situation.
Yeah, for example, some people are very wise with money but not wise of ideas, and the other way around, you know. So there is such a thing that you have different types of wisdom as well.
Okay, so I guess that's the right place to stop. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, guys, who you may subscribe to our channel. You know, so I guess in the future there will be more philosophical discussions. Okay.